Hello.
Look at you in your background.
I took this picture yesterday on my walk, and I thought the tree was pretty. It doesn't do it justice here, but it is really pretty.
It is.
For some reason, I'm really muted today, but is what it is.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I will let our listeners know that I am really a huge fan of Iron Man. I think everybody knows that. They know that I volunteered last year. I tried to volunteer this year. And on Saturday I was supposed to do in September, I was supposed to do a 12-hour walk with the Colin O'Brady group. And I thought, well, I'll just start by going and watching part of the Iron Man. So I will walk to the Iron Man. Well, one of my friends was participating in Ironman, and I thought, oh, I'll never make it if I walk. So I drove and unfortunately didn't get to see him. But then I went downtown and I did quite a bit of walking downtown. And I thought, I wonder if I stand here, if I will see my friend come through and I'll be able to see him when he starts the run. And I thought, this is a really great place. And I ended up meeting two of the nicest ladies. And one of the nicest lady is here today, and her name is Sarah Yates.
Hello.
So as we got talking, I just was telling Sarah and her friend just a little bit about what I was supposed to be doing that day and wanting to cheer on a friend of mine. And then somehow we got to talking about what Sarah does. And she was talking to me about sourdough bread. And I was super intrigued because at one point I started doing sourdough bread. It was very unsuccessful. I had a lot of hooch, but I never got the real.
There you go. Hey, hooch is something.
Yeah, I never got oh, look at your dog.
I did. I know.
What a pumpkin.
Yeah. He's mad because I'm not paying attention to him right now.
Well, no, because you're on a podcast.
Yeah, right.
So for our listeners who aren't watching on YouTube, Sarah's dog jumped up and he's super cute. So anyway, I never got the starter to really do what it was supposed to do. I tried to troubleshoot. I tried starting over. I even bought some San Francisco sourdough starter to try and get that started, and that didn't work either. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to leave sourdough to the pros. And then when I was talking to Sarah, I thought, oh, I need to have you come on the podcast. So tell us how you got started.
So complete happenstance. I think it was in April this year, a friend of mine and I went to a cooking class that, and I'm down in the St. Louis, Missouri area. So there was a cooking class down in Clayton. We went to it, and the lady who was teaching the class kept referring to, she had driven down from Chicago to teach this class, and she was meeting a friend, and she brought her some of her sourdough starter because she wasn't able to get hers to thrive. And so she was going to give her some of hers. And she just kept talking about, like, everybody just knew what she was talking about. And I was completely clueless. And so I just thought, when I got home that night, I'm going to Google this, because I Google everything, and Googled, what is sourdough starter? It was like, I just got sucked into this like giant black hole. And I don't know, probably for 2 or 3 weeks, that's all I did was educate myself, listening to podcasts, reading articles, watching videos. And I learned that for a sourdough starter is actually just flour and water that ends up developing into and growing good, healthy bacteria and yeast. And that then in making traditional sourdough bread or sourdough products, you use part of that sourdough starter to cause the rise in the bread instead of using commercial yeast. And then I thought, well, that's really cool. So I'm still listening, and I'm hearing like just the history of sourdough starters and how back in ancient days, before Fleischmann's instant yeast, Like, this is how they would make anything. And that it was very typical and very common for families to have a sourdough starter and name it, typically a family name. And then it was just revered, and it was something that the grandmother would keep alive, because you have to feed it. It becomes kind of like a little pet. You can kill it or it can thrive. And it does, it takes time and it takes energy and dedication, but these ladies would pass it down through the generations. And that's how now some people will say, oh, well, our sourdough starter has been in our family for 200 years. And to be completely transparent, I was pissed that my family didn't have one. Like, I felt completely gypped.
Your
that
family let you down, Sarah.
My family let me down. And so I thought, you know what, screw this and screw all of my ancestors. I'm going to start one, and I'm going to keep this little turtle alive, and I'm going to pass it down. And then I'm going to be the cool one that started a starter, and hopefully, the future generations of my offspring will like it enough to keep it going. And so I started a starter on May 10th of just this past year. And, it takes a while. And finally got started enough or strong enough to where I could start baking with it. So I started baking with it, and met you at the Ironman. Not because I don't run Ironman competitions, triathlons, my husband does. So then I started baking these things. And there's this thing with sourdough that you have discard, that you have to. So anyway, you end up with all this other stuff that you can either throw away, which I don't like to throw things away, or you can bake with it. So I'm baking sourdough muffins and sourdough cupcakes and sourdough cookies and sourdough tortillas and you name it, and I'm making it. And my husband and I are like, holy cow, like, we can't keep eating all these carbs, or we're going to be on the 1,000 Pound Sister Life show on TLC. And so I'm like giving all this stuff away, because now I'm just completely addicted to baking all the things that are sourdough. And then people start, talking, and they're like, oh my gosh, did you try Sarah's sourdough bread? You need to call her. And then they're sharing it on Facebook. And then the next thing I know, I'm tied to my kitchen for a month and a half baking, because I guess sourdough is hard for some people. And for some reason, it came very easy and naturally for me. So yeah, that's how I got into it. That's what happened.
Wow, that is a great story. I'm one of the ones that mine did not thrive.
Yeah.
I too did a bunch of research. I even used different water. So I would go to I would go online and on Facebook groups, and I would I would watch the posts to see what people would say. So many of us, there were a lot of posts, at least when I was on, that really could not make their sourdough starter thrive.
Yeah.
And so therefore there were a lot of experienced sourdough people that helped us with different flour, that helped us with different water, different temperatures, different lids, or
all the things, like
all the things. I was trying to think of cheesecloth.
yeah.
So you had some, air exposure, and
Right.
I mean, you can absolutely go down a rabbit hole, and this could take hours out of your life. If you don't have a good sourdough starter,
Right.
you would be spending hours and hours. I finally just said, you know what? It's not worth it. I enjoy it. I love sourdough. My husband loves sourdough. So when you and I started talking about it, yes, and I do not want to do Ironman either. I love to participate as a volunteer, and I love to provide encouragement, but yeah, I have zero interest in it. It gives me a lot of encouragement,
For
and
sure.
I really enjoy it, but I do not want to participate in Ironman.
I want to participate as a spectator and a volunteer.
There you go.
Because
Yes.
the energy in the atmosphere there was unlike anything else I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's
So,
amazing.
yeah, it was cool.
So what is a sourdough product that you get asked for a lot?
So do you know what an artisan bowl is?
I believe I've heard of it. I don't
Okay,
necessarily
so
know that I or our listeners know.
it's an artisan boule, boule, is just like a fancy schmancy round loaf of bread. And you typically will find them at, the fancy bakeries. Because to buy traditional sourdough, you're not going to get it in a loaf that looks like Wonder Bread. It's going to be an artisan boule. And so I'm making 4 right now. I've got 4, I guess right now, they're not loaves right now, they're dough. Going through the process of all that so I started them at about 6 o'clock this morning. They will go, I'll work with them all day today, and then they'll go into the fridge overnight. And then tomorrow morning I will bake them. And these are just plain sourdough, just plain Jane sourdough. So those, and then the other, so I get just the plain, people just love plain. I will also do this just plain, but I'll add in diced jalapeno and some shredded cheddar cheese. So we get a lot of that. People love to make the grilled cheese sandwiches with that. Or I've had one lady, she'll take a piece of the bread, she'll toast it, and then she'll with like a biscuit cutter or a cookie cutter, cut a hole out of the middle of that, put it in a skillet, and then put an egg in there. And then I think someone said they call that a toad in a hole.
My dad used to make those for me. He called them the
Yep.
Egyptian eyes.
Okay, there you go.
Same thing.
And then I just recently made, for the first time, sourdough cinnamon rolls.
Ooh, I bet those were good.
Well, yeah, that's what I keep hearing. I took them up to my church because I knew the whole staff was going to be there. And again, I kept one aside because they were massive. And I kept one aside for my husband and I to, quality control, taste test, of course, took the rest up to church. And one of the pastor's wives just pulled me aside Sunday and said, my husband hasn't stopped talking about you and these sourdough cinnamon rolls. So those are, I might start making those for a little cafe up at church. But sourdough takes a long time because it is the natural wild yeast. And so that's why I have to babysit the dough all day for one day, depending on what it is you're making, because those natural yeast and the bacteria need time to rise. And it's not just like I can, bake a regular loaf of bread in an hour. It doesn't work like that with sourdough.
Take us through, you've mentioned that these are just plain sourdough.
Yeah.
Take us through the process of, so you took it from starter.
Yeah.
And take us through the steps until they come out of the oven.
Oh, sorry, I just hit my. Okay, so this is my starter.
Okay.
So and I don't do all of the fancy schmancy, I just use water that comes out of my refrigerator. So it is filtered. And I do use organic bread flour, but so I don't know if you can even see.
Yep, I can see the bubbles forming.
Yeah.
So I'll let our listeners know that are listening and not on our YouTube channel. It is a glass canning jar, I would say. And in the canning jar, there's the organic flour with the filtered water. And then there's a rubber band, if my memory serves me correct. The rubber band is to show the increased growth of the starter.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So I had this morning about 6 o'clock when I started the bread that I'm making right now. I knew that I needed 200 grams of sourdough starter. So I had a much larger jar this morning that I had fed before I went to bed so that I would have plenty to start my loaves with today. It's chilly here today. So I think right now it's only 68 degrees in my house. So and this is again, this is my first fall with my sourdough starter. Her name is Cassie. That's a whole other story too. But she's not used to these cold temperatures. So I think I might bust out a heating pad that I've seen people do, and then like put some towels on it and then set your starter, because they do, like the yeast and the bacteria, they thrive in, warm spaces. And then these are one of those little bowl covers that I just use on top.
Yep, plastic
Yeah.
plastic cover.
Yep, looks like a little shower cap.
Yep, it sure does. When you say that you had to feed your starter, Cassie, last night before you got started, what does that mean for our listeners?
So, and this is where I am probably very different. And if there are any sourdough professionals listening or watching, I just want to disclaimer that I am in no way saying I'm a professional. Like, I'm very new. I just somehow have gotten lucky and found something that I know how to do well. I don't understand all of the chemistry, and some people get really involved in math and hydration. I know that I needed to have 200 grams of active, bubbly starter this morning. I also know that, so I took 50 grams of not active sourdough starter because it had already risen yesterday and then came back down. So now it was hungry. So I got rid of part of it because that's part of the process, kept 50 grams. And then I fed it 100 grams of filtered water at room temperature, 100 grams of organic bread flour. So that gave me my 200 plus the 50 from the starter that I had, gives me 250. And because I used double the amount, so 100 is double 50, I had 50 starter, 100 water, 100 bread flour. It was going to take my sourdough starter quite a while to chew through all that. So just because I know my starter and I know that she's working a little slower these days because it's a little cooler, we haven't turned the heat on yet, I knew it would take her all night to really get chewing through that. So when I woke up this morning, she'd be raring to go, hopefully, because she has a mind of her own. But yes, she had definitely peaked by the time I got up. So that's how you feed her. You just, and like, I'm not baking today. So I just put a little bit, like I think 25 grams of starter, and then added, I think 25 grams of water and flour this morning, just so I could show you, and then I'm not going to bake for the next couple of days. So I'll feed her real good and then I'll stick her in the fridge. So.
All right. So take us through how you started this morning then.
So this morning I use a digital scale. I do all my measurements by grams. I don't use cups or any of those typical measurements. First thing that I do is I get a big old bowl and I put it on my digital scale, and then I measure out my water. So I measure out my water in grams. For what I use, I do 350 grams of water, and then 50 grams of sourdough starter, 500 grams of bread flour, and 10 grams of salt. And that's it. That is all. And that's, again, part of what I love is the simplicity, the lack of chemicals, the lack of preservatives. It doesn't have all of the junk in it that if you bought sourdough from the store, it would taste good, but it's still a chemical shit show, really. And I don't like that. So I actually, just to make good use of my time, I do two loaves at once. So this is 2. So everything was double. So 700 water, 100 sourdough starter, 1,000 grams of flour, 20 grams of water or salt. And so then I've got 2 going in here, and then I have 2 going in here. So you just mix all that up, and it becomes like just this real shaggy, ugly dough, and you just let it sit for an hour. And it's something called autolyse happens there. I've read about it, but I don't remember what happens, but it's very important. So always do it.
I do remember that. Do you stir it up with a spoon, like a big spoon with your KitchenAid?
I use a Danish whisk.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Yes. Yes. And again, on one of my sourdough rabbit holes is when I learned about this, but it's amazing. So then you just, mix that up. And then again, like I've got these little things that look like little bowl covers, shower caps, stick them over the top, let them sit for an hour, come back. And then just using my hands, just kind of pull it into more of a ball, walk away, let it sit for another 30 minutes. So yeah, it is time consuming, but a lot of it is hands off for the first 2 hours. But right now, these 2 loaves, so at about 8 o'clock this morning, I started what is called the stretch and folds. And there's a lot of people have different, methods that they swear by, that they will not do. I started the stretch and fold method and not the coil over method, and it has always worked for me. So I've just never tried anything different. These are ready. So you're in this process, I'm just going to start doing it as I talk, but essentially I'm just going to pull up and stretch it out as much as I can get it before it breaks, fold it over, turn a quarter, do it again, turn a quarter, do it again, turn it a quarter, and let it sit for another 20 minutes to an hour before I do it again. And this process helps to strengthen the dough and build the gluten structure in it. So this is also if I was doing a add-in dough, if I was going to do jalapeno cheddar, this is when I would have it all measured out, and then I would pour some in and then start integrating it in. And as you do the stretch and folds, it just becomes part of the dough.
Now, are you using any flour at all on the board, on your hands?
No, I've just got it still in my bowl.
Okay.
I don't know if you can.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, better view.
Yeah.
So see, this was my 4th one. And so it's getting hard. It doesn't really want to do a whole lot. But then this one, you'll see when I first lift it up, it's going to be really airy and it's going to have a lot more give to it than the other because I'm just starting. It has relaxed. This bowl isn't as strong.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it's got a lot more give to it. But then by the time I do my 4th one, it will have started to toughen up a little bit. And this here just builds the structure, gets some air in there, keeps it alive, keeps it going. Once I usually do 5 to 6 sets of these within about 3 hours.
Okay.
And then I just put a cover on it, something, see, it's getting real tough.
Yep, I can see that.
Yeah. And that's at first, it kind of freaked me out. So I'm thinking, what happened? But then I just cover them back up, let them sit until I do another set of stretch and folds. And then it's kind of chilly. So I've been just covering it up with a towel also. That way I just put plastic wrap over. It helps to keep some of the moisture in and dust and everything else that is always just floating through the air out. So once it's done with the stretch and folds, then you enter your bulk ferment stage. And that is where your sourdough starter really does all of its yeasty fun goodness. And it's also been the hardest stage for me to perfect because there's no, it's not a certain time of, after 30 minutes, it's done. It depends on your starter. It depends on the temperature of your house. And these starters really do have a personality of their own. And there's some days where Cassie is on it and things are growing real good. And there's other days where she's like, no, we're not doing this. I just have to throw away whatever we did. But the bulk ferment process, it's getting nice and bubbly, and you'll see big bubble pockets on the inside and on top. After that, and that in my house, if my house is between 70 and 72 degrees, usually takes between 6 and 8 hours. So again, hands off, but I'm also checking it every hour or so just to make sure, because you don't want it to overproof or underproof. After that, my favorite is called where you're shaping it. So then you take your dough out, and I use a bench scraper, which just one of these, and you shape your dough into like a round, and you're just getting it all tucked in. And there's a bakery that I love in Phoenix, Arizona, that I've watched a ton of videos, and I have learned lots of fun techniques from him. So you just get it shaped real good, get it nice and tight, and then you put it in the refrigerator overnight in a bowl. I usually use, wait 1 second. I like to use this bowl. It's just really just fine. This is like what you would see at a picnic, you know, just a plastic bowl. And then, so I get my dough all ready, beautiful, looking like a loaf. And then I'll take white rice flour, because it doesn't absorb liquid like flour does, or wheat flour. I'll rub a little bit on top of the dough, and then I take it and I put it like in here with a flour sack, and then put it in the fridge, let it sit at least 5 hours, between 5 hours to 36. That is when it really develops a lot of the strong sourdough flavor. So my son and his roommates don't like a strong sourdough flavor, so I'll just let theirs sit for 2 or 3 hours before I bake it. I like a strong one, so I'll let it sit for at least 24. Take it out, put it in my Dutch oven for about 450 degrees for about, I don't know, 30 minutes with the lid on. And then you take the lid off, lower the temp down to about 400, and let it sit till it's as dark or as light as you want. That's it.
It does sound like a really long process.
It is.
I have done a few myself, not quite to your expertise, but
I'm not really an expert. I just like, again, like I'm just as shocked as everyone else that like I'm doing this. This wasn't on my agenda.
Well, I saw a picture on your website and they look absolutely beautiful.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Do you use the lamb? The lamb is the scoring on the top.
Yeah, so it's pronounced lamb.
Ah, okay.
And yeah, it is just a razor blade on a stick, really. You have to score it on, if you're doing an artisan bowl, like I've been talking about here, because the dough needs a place for the air to escape. If you don't score it, it's just going to, I'm going to say the word burst, but not in a bad way. It just, the air's going to escape. But if you score it, and some people will do those beautiful intricate designs with like the mandalas or beautiful little wheat stalks. I've tried that. That's not part of my purpose, clearly. But yeah, I'll usually, so my sourdough starter's named Cassie. And so I usually do a reverse C. And then, yeah, and then it just gives it that nice big poof.
Awesome. Anything that you would want our listeners to know about sourdough, or how they can get a hold of you? And do you sell your sourdough?
Sure, yeah. So that like month or so where things were crazy and everything in my life revolved around sourdough, that I didn't find that to be very fun. You know, I love this. I love to feed people and I love to cook. So like it's kind of word of mouth right now. Again, I'm in the St. Louis area. I'm a home baker. I don't have a commercial kitchen. I can't crank out 40 loaves a day. And I also enjoy doing other things too. So it's just kind of as needed, I guess.
It's a hobby.
It is a hobby. I have to eat gluten-free, so I can't eat the sourdough.
Oh no.
I know, but it's okay. So I have developed a gluten-free sourdough starter using gluten-free flour. And so I do bake my own. I do a lot of gluten-free sourdough baking. But a friend of mine reached out the other day and asked if I would make her 2 loaves for this weekend. She's got an event, so I'm making some for her. A neighbor is sick with COVID right now, so one of the loaves I'm working on right now, I'll take over to them. I love doing it. I don't mind doing it, but I can't, I did do a fundraiser. That was fun. I just, in like 3 days, cranked out, I think 21 loaves and took them and sold them. And that was fun. I had more fun doing that. So hit me up if there's a fundraiser kind of thing, but to take orders, and that stressed me out. I do. Yeah. If anybody wanted some of my starter, yeah, you're welcome to it. Sure, I would sell it because it was hard. I wouldn't sell it for a lot. I do have some that's dehydrated in case I accidentally kill my active one. I have some from the same strain, so it's still Cassie. I think the thing that I would want people to know, at least about mine, is where I got the name Cassie from. So did I tell this to you, Robin, when we were?
You did, but I love the story, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear it.
Okay, so my grandmother, her name was Cassie, and she passed away at a very young age, right before my mom turned 3. So I never ever met my grandmother Cassie, and my mom was so young, she doesn't have any memories, but I grew up knowing from different things family members had told me that I look like her, that I have her laugh, I sound like her. So I always knew who Cassie was. I almost felt this connection to her, but at the same time, it didn't make sense. And in my family, Cassie just wasn't talked about a lot. And so I've always kind of struggled with that. But then just with learning about the sourdough starter, all the history that goes along with it, and the heritage, I thought this is a way that I could honor my grandmother Cassie and keep her name continuing to be spoken. She passed away in 1956, and here we are, 2022. And her name is still being spoken. And so in the sourdough world, a lot of people, anything that they make with their starter will have that name. So for me, like the labels that I'll put on these say Cassie Sourdough Artisan Boule, or Cassie Sourdough Cinnamon Rolls, Cassie Pancakes, whatever. But yeah, for me, I feel like that's what this has given me a purpose to do, is to help keep her name, her memory alive, because she was taken at such a very, very young age, and her story was cut short, and that sucks. But, I feel like I can do something to at least keep her name going. So
what a wonderful tribute.
Cassie, thank you. Yeah.
Aw. That's very sweet.
Yeah. So that's what it's all about. I don't care about making money. I hope I make people happy, but I really want to honor my grandma.
Yeah. How can people get a hold of you?
Cassie, Cassie, Sourdough. And I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I have completely enjoyed our discussion.
Me too. I love talking sourdough.
And to all of our listeners, stay awesome and keep reaching for your anything.